Now the next section is child support. Section 4 is the child support section, and you see it right here in the main window. I'll expand it, and you'll see that there's a sole residential / shared parenting worksheet. As you are no doubt already aware, Ohio uses the same worksheet for both sole residential and shared parenting arrangements. And there's a separate worksheet for split parenting. You can see in this expanded section that you merely select the worksheet you wish to use, and then you can select any page to start making your entries. I should say additionally that the matter of selecting the correct worksheet has already been decided based on your selection of the parenting agreement, or not the parenting agreement, but the parenting arrangement on the General Information Worksheet. So in selecting a worksheet for completion now, you want to keep in mind which one you selected when you were back on the General Information Worksheet. For first-time data entry, you would almost always start at page 1, which is where I'll click right here. Now, we're not going to spend much time in this instructional video on the child support section because there's a separate comprehensive child support instructional video that we have available at our website. It's 1.75 general hours in length, and it's approved by the Ohio Supreme Court for continuing legal education. Therefore, we won't repeat that material in this video, which is focusing on spousal support. At the outset, I'll tell you that the child support program that is sold separately is incorporated into MA, and that it's the differences that we'll focus on here. First of all, you'll notice in the main window that there are 3 versions of each worksheet: an annotated version, a statutory version, and a short form version. But unlike the regular child support program, you cannot make entries on the statutory or short form versions. You can only do your data entry in the annotated version. One reason we force you to the annotated version is that it has all the additional fields that are required to do a child support computation. The statutory and short forms do not have those fields. When I say additional fields, I mean fields that don't appear in the statutory version. An example would be with respect to the child care credit. You'll encounter cases where it's not enough to simply know what the child care expenses are. In situations of mid-low and low-income families, it can be necessary to calculate a party's tax liability in order to see if the tax liability limits the normally calculated child care credit. For this reason, additional information is required in order to perform the calculation correctly. This is especially true of the child support program. Not so much with MA, because MA already knows pretty much all about the tax stuff already based on your prior entries. A better example might be line 8, which requires that you enter the tax dependency exemption amount and the number of children from another marriage in order to calculate the adjustment amount, and neither of those items had been entered previously, so it's important then that you would put them in the child support section here with respect to line 8. Only the annotated version of the child support worksheet has fields for this additional information that is necessary to perform the calculation. By contrast, the statutory worksheet has only the line items as they appear in the statute, and the short form is about as stripped down as you can get. You might ask, why is the statutory form even included then? And the reason is that that's the one you'll probably file with the court. It's possible that the annotated worksheet might have confidential information that you might not want to share with opposing counsel or the court, so the statutory version is there for that reason. And the short form is exactly what it purports to be. Its purpose is to get everything on one sheet of paper so you can staple it to the file cover, for example, for quick reference if you need it, and that way you can avoid shuffling through 6 or 7 pages to get to the information you want. We'll start on page 1, of course, and when page 1 appears, you'll notice that the Next Page button appears on the special toolbar. As was the case with the Tax Adjustments and Credits worksheet, the paging button allows you to move from page to page in the Child Support worksheet without needing to return to the main window. I think I mentioned earlier in this video that as you progress through the worksheets, you'll be doing less and less data entry. I made that comment because MA uses information that you entered in earlier worksheets to perform calculations and to transfer data that appears in later worksheets. The child support worksheet is where you really begin to see that happening. Assuming that you've made the entries in the first three sections, that is general information, income, and expenses, you'll see that much of the child support worksheet is completed even before you begin. And this will be even more true when we get to the next section, spousal support. Anyway, look at the top of page 1, the names of the parties, the case number, the number of children, the parenting arrangement, all that stuff is already completed based on the information that you entered in the General Information Worksheet. Even below that on line 1, the wife's employment income from the wage worksheet is also there already. As an aside, there are times when you may want to get a quick child support calculation done, and you may be tempted to fire up MA. Resist that temptation. As you should be seeing now, MA assumes that you've done all the preliminary work that we've been talking about in sections 1 through 3. If you want to perform a quick child support calculation, use the child support program instead. Now you could say, hey, I can override the wage line without completing the wage worksheet. And that's true, but as you progress through the child support worksheet, you'll find yourself needing to override practically every darn entry. And that's setting you up for making calculation mistakes. Not only that, but it slows down the data entry process if you need to keep overriding every time you tab to a new field. It will also alter the ability of the program to dynamically adjust line entries as you enter other data. Moreover, the wage worksheet is used in the tax section and in other places apart from the 1A line of the child support worksheet. So overrides, bottom line, they're things to be avoided in most situations. Unless you're doing all the preliminary work, using MA purely for performing a child support computation is neither reliable nor efficient. Consider this just to give you an idea. On page 1 there are 38 fields. 20 of them, that's over half, are fields that either you can't even tab to or you'd need to override them. Now continuing on with page 1 here, and taking into account the fact that there's less than half the fields where you need to potentially enter information, the best way to proceed, as with the other worksheets we've seen, is to just tab your way from the top to the bottom. If a field has a gray input box, you need to see whether you need to enter information. Otherwise, if a field's text input box has an aqua-colored background, you should find that it's already been completed if it's appropriate to do so. By tabbing your way through the page, you're guaranteed not to miss anything. Some of the gray fields that you may need to take a look at are line 1B, which is the bonus commissions field. I mentioned that base income from employment, which is line 1A, comes from the wage worksheet that we've already taken a look at. Well, line 1B requires that you enter bonuses and commissions. And that's from 2 and 3 years ago. That type of information wasn't entered in anywhere before, and that's why you have to enter it in here. Another thing that may warrant clarification is line 2. If you're savvy about tax matters, you might say, well, we've already entered Schedule C income on the other taxable income worksheet, so why is it necessary to make an entry on line 2? And the reason is that the Schedule C amount is essentially the net income figure. The child support worksheet, by contrast, requires that you enter gross income and then ordinary and necessary business expenses. Consequently, you need to look at those fields and make the necessary entries if a party has business income, because it's not going to get that from any other worksheet that you've already completed. I'm going to use the next page button to go to page 2. On page 2, you find that there are 42 fields, and 11 of them are already completed. Again, we have a separate video for child support, so I'm not going to repeat all the information that applies to each line, and instead I'm going to move along, clicking on the next page button so I can show you line 19. If you're familiar with our child support program, you'll notice, as I mentioned a bit earlier, line 19 is a bit different in MA, different in a good way. It's a lot simpler because all the prior information that you've entered in MA is already available for the purpose of calculating a party's tax income liability and for applying any low-income limitations that may limit the line 19 amount. So instead of having to enter all the collateral information in the gray box of line 19, like you would need to do in the child support program, in MA, all you really have to do is make sure the box is checked, and it should already be checked by default, that is labeled Use MA, I've completed the tax info screens. And by the tax info screens, we mean the wage worksheet, the other taxable income worksheet, and the tax adjustments and credits worksheet that we've gone through already in the main windows, steps 1, 2, and 3. And incidentally, that's another reason not to skip around from page to page or from worksheet to worksheet via the main window. As I've said before, because information in earlier worksheets often feeds the fields you find on later worksheets or reports, it's best to work from top to bottom in the main window. Of course, if a file is already completed and you're just tweaking some entries, you can zip around wherever you want, in whatever order you like. Speaking of zipping around, I'm going to zip past the next 2 pages, 4 and 5. You'll see that, again, there's not much that needs to be entered. I will say that I get a regular, if infrequent, question as to why a user is not getting a child support amount on page 6, even though they know there should be one there. And in the case of shared parenting arrangements, it's almost always because they've forgotten to select an obligor on page 4. Remember that in a sole residential arrangement, MA knows that the obligor is going to be the non-residential parent. Whereas in a shared parenting order, MA really can't be sure. When you think about it for a moment, you can't assume that the party with the higher income is going to be the obligor. Women with successful careers and men who choose to be husbands have changed all that. Therefore, if I was going to say anything about page 4, it would be to call your attention to the fact that if you're working with a shared parenting arrangement, make sure you've checked one of the obligor boxes that appear in the horizontal gray bar near the middle of the screen, right here. Another comment I might make about that is that if you click the Check File button up here, it will remind you if you have a situation where you had a shared parenting box checked on page 1, for example, and you forgot to check one of the boxes on page 4. And as long as we're on the subject, if I haven't said it already, I'll say it again, that whenever things don't look right, the first thing you should do is click on the Check File button. The resulting report may tell you what it is that you overlooked. I know I said I was going to zip through pages 4 and 5, but I thought of one more thing I'd like to say about page 5. I'll click on the Next Page button so you can see page 5. Every so often, I take a call from a user who complains that they're trying to make an entry on line 26B and they're not able to. The solution is noting that line 23B is identical to line 26B. When you get to line 26B, MA assumes that you've already answered line 23B, and therefore you can't make an entry on line 26B because line 26B should have just the same amount as line 23B does. And that's why you couldn't tab to line 26B. You know, come to think of it, after 1 or 2 calls on that issue, I think we changed the character of line 26B to make it overridable instead of a passover field. But even still, that's an example of something that I mentioned earlier about overriding. The only way you'd get the right answer in this situation is to put the correct amount on line 23B. That way, line 26B would be completed without the need for overriding it, and the same amount would be on both lines. If you override line B, that would only solve the matter of getting an amount on that line. It would not produce the correct final figure on line 28 because the amount would still be missing from line 23B. Okay? Anyway, let's look at page 6 now. And again, there's not much to enter on this page. I'm not going to say a word about a deviation because that's a subject you can spend an awful lot of time discussing. And we've actually spent a lot of time discussing it in the child support video that I mentioned earlier. I just want to say that the amount you find here on line 29 times 12 is the annual child support amount that is used everywhere else in MA. So anytime you see a report or a worksheet that says child support and it has an amount there, this is where it's getting the number from. For example, when we were looking at the non-taxable income worksheet, in this case the wife's, and the personal living expense worksheet, in this case the husband's, the child support amount that appeared on those two worksheets for this marriage was the line 29 amount times 12.